covenant tonight, and I would like you to go into it further yourself, because believe it or not, it is the foundation. And good theology, if you understand it right, can make a huge difference in your life. It's not just head knowledge, but it's useful head knowledge to really bring about a transformation. Remember, the transformation happens in your minds, yes? So which is to do with what you believe, obviously, about yourself, about God. There's another word for that, theology. Okay, theo, God, ology, the study of God, understanding God, understanding you. Now, covenant, God is a covenant-keeping God. He doesn't break his word. Now, here's the sequence, right? When you believe in Jesus, you become born of God. To be born of someone, you become their son or their daughter, correct? Mm-hmm. So when you're born of the Spirit of God, you become their son or their daughter. Now, and God says he puts and when you become his son or daughter, when you believe, he puts his Spirit in you as a deposit, guaranteeing your what? Your inheritance. You know, the Queensland law is that a parent cannot disinherit a child once it's born of them. So if you have a child and then your child ends up hating you and you wish you never had that child, I'm not saying you ever would, but imagine you did, and you think, I don't want my child to get any of my inheritance, I want all my nice children to get all the inheritance, not the bad one. You can't do that. Once they're your child, they get the same inheritance as the other children, by Queensland law. Really? Many laws are like that. Mm-hmm. So the power of being a child means you're guaranteed inheritance with God. Okay.
Needs to be the black sheep.
Now, if you ever get a chance to read Ephesians 3, it talks about that God asks, Paul prays to God that our hearts would be opened and our minds would be opened to understand, if you like, and gain a power to actually comprehend the glorious inheritance of the saints. So God has an inheritance waiting for his children that is beyond your imagination. That according to Paul, you actually need a supernatural expansion within your mind, probably to get a small portion of it, to understand a small portion of it. You've got to understand it. You want to understand what inheritance that you've got. We are called heirs and co-heirs with Christ. If you're co-heir with someone, whose inheritance are you sharing? Theirs, correct? If you're a co-heir with Christ, whose inheritance are you sharing? Christ. Who is he? The Son of God. Very God of very God. Get your head around that. There's a guy named Thomas Martinez. There was this in 2000, there was this unusual ad in a paper in South America. The police searching for a man who's inherited $6 million, but he doesn't know it. And his name was Thomas Martinez. And so that in 1997, there was what's her name again? Her name was Ines Oliveira. And 40 years ago, Thomas Martinez had married her, and for a few months they were together and they lived this middle-class life, and then they separated. So they've been separated for 40 years. Long time, yeah? And they're only together for a couple of months, but they never finalised the divorce. They never had kids. She never remarried. And in 1997 she died of solitude. But in 1995, she inherited a fortune, $6 million. And so her brother, for 2 years, or for 3 years, Thomas's brothers had been searching for him to tell him, hey, you've got all this money. And they hired some detectives to find Thomas, to tell him. And they had to go to this other, I think Santa Cruz is where they went. And they were searching for Thomas, and they'd heard that he frequented this one particular market. And so when they went into the front of the markets, Thomas recognised one of the guys as a former detective that he knew, and Thomas was on charges in Chile, which is where he came from, for cheque fraud. And so he thought they're there to arrest him for cheque fraud. So he snuck out the back, and he was never found, never seen again. He lived the rest of his life in abject poverty, fear, and loneliness. But his inheritance was worth $6 million. He was a rich man, and he didn't know it. If you don't access your inheritance, you could live in fear, poverty, loneliness, brokenness, rejection, and not know your inheritance. Does that sound like a waste? The poor guy lived on the streets the rest of his life, but he could have lived in luxury. And not only that, but he didn't realise that the charges for cheque fraud had expired, and he was now free. And he could have gone back to Chile where he wanted to be. The price that we pay for our ignorance. Now, the question is, each one of you, what price do you really pay for your own ignorance? Someone once described grace, Grace, God's riches at Christ's expense. So he purchased an immeasurable amount of freedom and of life and of victory. And he purchased your right standing, your forgiveness, but he also purchased an inheritance through his own death. And he also purchased not just your freedom, but your prospering. He also purchased your life flourishing. And he also purchased a new identity. And he also purchased your sonship and your daughtership. And he also purchased your full and utter acceptance. Let's just work on that one, shall we? Let's just work on, he was rejected so that you could be accepted. He purchased an amazing acceptance for you. Now, do you access that? Ask yourself. How much rejection do you live with unnecessarily, just like Thomas did? How much do you legitimize thoughts of rejection, inferiority, intimidation, insecurity, not good enough, unloved, not worthy, invisible? How many thoughts of those things go through your head every day? You would get so surprised if you knew how many there were. And that is not the truth that is in Christ. But he purchased something really beautiful. So you can be Thomas who snuck out the back door, or you can be Thomas that says, if there's something that can be given to me, then I will receive that. What of you? If you know you're not accessing your inheritance and you're living as an emotionally and a relationally crippled person, then you are living a lie, because God tells what is truth, and everything other than that is a lie. Is that a good definition? Well, put your own thoughts through that grid and ask yourself whether you're going to believe the truth or lying emotions from your past. Until you do, you'll be trapped in the cycle that those feelings and those thoughts will keep you in, and that's pain and destruction. And they may as well be true if you're going to believe them, but they're not, they're a lie. Every one of us, this affects our own life. If you don't believe me, tomorrow, this week, when something happens to trigger an old thought or memory about yourself, watch what you do. In your behaviour, in your thoughts, or in your emotions. And then you've got to realise you've got an issue that God wants to sort out, but he has answers for you. And that transformation happens through your mind. So we'll finish on this. Salvation is twofold. It's in your heart, it's in your mind. God does the first transformation in your heart when you're giving consent. The second transformation will happen as you believe the truth. First one God does. Second one, who does?
You do it.
We do it.
Mm.
That's right. And you ever heard the term the fight of faith? That's what it is. It's a start at first. For you to counter those lies, it feels like a fight. So next week we want to get very, very practical. How do you make that truth from, well, that's nice theory, but I got no idea how to make that real. Good question? Well, how do you make it real? How do you realise it? I talk about realising. Realising it means to make it real, yeah? That's my understanding of it. And Rosie said, I always thought you said it's when you have real eyes. I went, you did it again. That's a heaps better definition. I'll write that down and claim credit. So next week we want to talk about having real eyes and allowing the truth to come into our minds and change our lives. Yeah? So next week is probably the most critical week, because if you don't get the practical, if you don't know, well, tell me how to do this, then this is all completely nice but useless information. True? So yeah, next week is the crunch. Let's do it.